Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Audiomo Podcast, and I'm going to have a fun one today. I'm in a good mood, and I have somebody who has been rearing to go, as he would say, join me onto this podcast, a long-time follower of this channel, and somebody I'm really excited to talk to, and that is Ian. How are you doing today, Ian?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you don't need to thank me for that. We've been trying to set this up for a little while, but, schedules are different, and we both have family responsibilities, as well as, a slight time difference. So that's one of those things that you have to overcome the odds, but we're here right now. And I want to start in one specific spot. I'm not sure if the people are going to have the cropped image or if they're going to see the full thing, but you can see this right now. There's a guitar behind me. That's the Jazzmaster. Now, I have that there because when we first started talking, this was what, like 8 months ago, 9 months ago on this YouTube channel? You were talking about something with the Jazzmaster. Like, oh, I have one of those too. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Lots of people have a Jazzmaster. I didn't think anything of that. Then in another video, I posted about the Gibson, the 339. And you're like, I have one of those too. And I'm like, all right, that's just weird. Like, I've never met anybody that has had both of those guitars. So if you could just explain to me how you ended up with those two models of guitars and what do you love about them?
Oh, yeah, great. The Jazzmaster was a funny one because I had a Jaguar that I got for my, 20th birthday, maybe 21st. And I ended up having to sell it. And so I had my own Jazzmaster for years and always kind of played around. And then I was hunting for a Jazzmaster, just, as you do, surfing gear pages. And I saw the American Pro ones come up, and I was looking at it in this Mystic Seafoam finish, and was kind of like, oh, that's really nice. Went and tried one, was and ahhing, and then browsing on a website of a shop that I went to, and a Fender Special Run one came up, and there was a pricing mistake, and it was literally like half the price that I'd been looking at. So I bought it. Then I had a fight of my conscience, so I rung them and said, I think you've made a pricing mistake, but I've ordered this, any chance I can have it though, for being so nice, and kind of laughed around. And so they said yeah, and which really surprised me. So it's just absolute bargain of the century. So I got it about £50 cheaper than a standard price of a Mexican one. And I'd always loved the offset body shape because I'm quite a broad-shouldered guy, so I like a slightly bigger shaped guitar. That was kind of one thing. I've always found my arm just sits really comfortable on a Jazzmaster, or kind of like a strange shaped guitar as well. It just feels natural to me. And obviously the trem is just to die for on Jazzmasters and Jaguars. It's so cool, so much fun. I've also played in quite a lot of bands that have at least one, sometimes two other guitarists as well. So I've always kind of wanted a guitar that can really cut through the mix as well. I know you can kind of EQ stuff, but it's nice to have that kind of almost out the box, as it were, a little bit of path of least resistance and a lot of fun. So that was how I came about that one, and sort of loved it ever since. The 339 was in lockdown 1, I think, or just between lockdown 1 and 2. I always like 335s as well. They're kind of really classic, but when I played one, they were just a bit too big. And someone said to me, hey, have you tried a 339? And I thought, sort of looked into it. And again, had no real intention of anything happening. And then a fairly local store, a guy got one in, and it was like a custom shop when Fender did that, when they were when Gibson were moving between factories. So they call it custom shop, but it wasn't a true custom shop. But so I took the guy down, anyway, played it, loved it. And just that kind of slightly airier tone, as sort of cheesy as that sounds. But so managed to pick up one of those, and again talked him quite far down on the original price as well, which was nice. So just two really good solid options that I've kind of found are super versatile. Like when I'm recording or working with different people, any kind of project seems to be, I could use those comfortably for almost any project I do and get a really good sound, which is kind of crucial to me.
They work so well together because the 339 is like a Les Paul in many ways, especially once you start recording with it, but it does. And I know that you cringed saying that it sounded airy. I know that sounded tacky to you, but it's a real thing. You notice it when you're playing back to back with a typical solid body dual humbucker guitar. And then you go to because really the 339 and 335 are very different with how they sound. The 335 has way more air to it that you can feel the presence of it. But sometimes when you have a bunch of other guitars involved, it can kind of like take too much space up, if that makes any sense. Whereas the 339, it just has a touch extra that you won't get from a regular solid body, and it works so well to offset a guitar like a Jaguar or a Jazzmaster, which is really ice picky kind of sounding instrument. Whereas if you're only using one guitar, the 335 might be the better overall choice because it fills everything. But in scenarios where you're doing multiple guitars, those two guitars, you could cover pretty much anything with them. And I've done that in the studio myself too. And I will admit this to you. I don't make many mistakes, I feel, when it comes to buying and selling guitars. That is a mistake. That was a mistake. When I sold that guitar, and I went the PRS route with the McCarty. It's nothing against the McCarty, but if I could undo that, I really mean this. If I could undo that, keep that extra money in my pocket and have that Gibson back, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it's such a funny one, isn't it? Because I've had, like, again, same as you, I don't blame PRS for it, but I've had this with PRSs a few times where I've lost it after one and I've found the way to find the extra money. And I've traded stuff and sort of, and got it. And then a year later, kind of gone, oh, I'm not sure that was the best thing that I could have done, And like I say, I absolutely love PRS guitars. I met Paul at like an event over here, and I love his ethos. I love the attention to detail and his kind of passion and stuff for the instrument and for the engineering behind it. But I just kind of always found this thing where they're so good. But the extra money and the deficit and all those kind of things, and sometimes the fear that brings with coming out and sort of gigging it in your local pub when there's a guy running on stage asking you to play Wonderwall when you're halfway through a set. I don't want him near a PRS. I'm sort of scared and nervous. Whereas with some other guitars, perhaps I'm a little bit more comfortable. But yeah, and the other trouble that led me to go back down the kind of the Gibson route, especially as the Fender kind of always stayed there, but was, and again, this sounds really cheesy, but it's just the honest truth. I didn't write as much on a PRS. And I think a really important thing for me as a guitar player, first and foremost, is when I pick up a guitar and I'm using it every day, if I'm writing new things on it all the time, or it's taking me in a slightly different direction, I really enjoy the instrument long term more. Like I might enjoy the build quality or like a bunch of short term or technical things. But if I am writing on it and being creative, that's what I'd like to do. So when it gets to mid to long term, that's what it always comes down to for me, for whether a guitar stays in my rig. But like you, I've made mistakes.
You hit on a really good point though, and it's part of it is the reason why I'm starting to lean towards that was a poor decision. It actually has nothing to do with some of what you said, but the main thing of why I find myself saying, oh, that was kind of a mistake, is not so much that I'm worried about dinging it, which sounds crazy because it's a core Paul Reed Smith model. Like that wouldn't bother me as much. It's the fact that I love that finish so much, and I bought a color that is so susceptible to fading, even though this room doesn't get much direct sunlight at all. And it would still begin to fade. Like the other purple one I had, the same thing was happening in there. That's what's part of it. I was just like, okay, I can let it go. But the guitar stays in its case. And I can understand how some people who collect guitars, or they don't care about that. Like, I want to keep it in good shape. Fair enough. I understand that. But like you, and what I was saying, I agree with you with, I want to play a guitar every day. And if I look behind me on the rack and all of a sudden I have an idea, if it's already out on the rack and I don't have to go through any other special thing to get the thing and start playing and start writing or working out ideas, it's immediate to me. And I know it's fickle, but we are fickle. That's the thing about being a musician, is finding a guitar that makes you want to write and having the guitar be like openly available to you. And with the McCarty, the way I look at that guitar is I'm ready to use that guitar when I'm ready to actually track, to commit for final tracking. That's it. Like I don't play that guitar for fun. I don't play that guitar for any other reason other than if I'm like, okay, this is good enough where the song it is, where I know this will fit in perfect. I'll track with it and I'll put it away. That's it. So it's funny. It really is funny. And isn't it strange? Almost too good. I didn't realize that could be a thing.
Yeah, it's so fascinating how that, because you're exactly right. Because I had the same thing with with the last PRS I had. Actually, it was a CE24, but I literally got it. They got it into stock. I was in the middle of a 2-week studio session with my brother, who was recording like an album before he moved to Australia. Wanted me to do like a bunch of the guitars for it, and there was a song that was kind of almost kind of California rock in style, and I just thought, actually, do you know that big kind of, I was like, I'm going to sneak the big Incubus-y kind of tone, like the Morning View tone on this, because I just think it'll be cool, and it's something that I can and I think it's appropriate. So anyway, it came in, so I rushed to get it, got back to the studio, was instantly comfortable on it, and for something that was already written when I wanted a specific sound, it was utterly perfect. And obviously the build quality of the thing, I know obviously it's, the core line is another sort of step up, but I absolutely loved it. But it was just one of those things where it was, I was a little bit worried even with that. So let alone a core to kind of go out and again, like I wasn't playing it every day. And I think I don't have the money, to be honest, or like, the kind of, if I've got something in my rig, I want it to be something I use every day or every gig. If it's something that's, for noise reasons, I can't use in the apartment or whatever, it needs to be something where I'm like, every time I go to do this, I want to use this, or know I've got it to use, and it be an option and not be worried about anything. I think life's a bit too short to worry about stuff like that. For me, it's just kind of have fun, pick the instrument up and just smile and do it, and that's, express yourself. That's kind of what I look for from it.
That's important. And at the end of the day, you're right. If you have to have less guitars, but each of the guitar has a significant purpose, the guitar has availability to you, and the guitar does not provide you with any sort of fear of damage or theft or loss. I mean, granted, whenever you go out and play, you're taking an inherent risk. That's just the reality of things. I don't know about you, but I've had things stolen from me at gigs, and I've had things broken on me that weren't my fault at gigs. I had a Les Paul that got the headstock snapped, and I had nothing to do with it. I had nothing to do with it. But I mean, it's different when you're intimidated by that, because you can get past those things because accidents are going to happen. You can't prevent everything. So when picking gear, I think you're actually hitting for a very, very valid argument to the fact that whatever gear you have, whatever your budget is, whatever it is, if it has a direct purpose, you're using it all the time and it inspires you to play it, then you're ahead of the game. But you mentioned Incubus, and now I know that we both love Incubus, as we've spoken about in the comments before. What is the best Incubus album, and what is the worst Incubus album? No in between here. I'm giving you. You have to give me both.
Wow, that's a terrifying question, because any of my friends who watch this is gonna create a can of worms.
If I did it.
And my girlfriend as well, because we have very different views on this. Okay. She's an Incubus fan as well. So for me, the one that was my absolute favorite, but it's perhaps because of the point in time, was Make Yourself, because it was an album that came out at a specific point in my life when I was at sixth form, and it kind of united like the whole like common room. So no matter what music anyone was into, if that was on the stereo, everyone would be like, oh, this is really cool, it's different, it's interesting, and so that's probably my favorite for that reason, as much as anything else. And I just find that from start to finish, it felt like more of an album. Morning View was great as well. I really did enjoy that as well, and Science. But I feel like Make Yourself was the album for me. But obviously, I love all their albums. So this is really tough. Mm-hmm. I get why they did. If not now, when? I understand why they did it, and I think, as in the things that Brandon Boyd was doing, but that felt to me more like a Brandon Boyd solo project. There were some high points on it, but that felt to me a little bit like, so that's probably my least favorite, if I'm honest. Yeah. So, but it's so hard to say anything bad about any Incubus album though, because I just absolutely love them. But how about for you? What's your?
Okay. 8 would be my least favorite by far. because it didn't sound like Incubus to me. Like there were flashes where you're like, oh, this is Incubus, but then other flashes where it's almost like I felt like it was starting to go not musically so, but in production style so, in a very modern Weezer direction of just the approach of the songwriting and just the production of it. I did that was the one album I listened to it and I was just like, oh, is this the end? Like, is this really the end? Because it happens to every band. And that's the impossible thing, especially when a band is as talented and writes as good as songs to match the talent level of the members of the band. It's hard to keep doing that and keep doing that and keep doing that for decades without, eventually you're going to take a chance and it's not going to work out. So I don't get angry that they made that album, but at the same time, it's just like, this is an album that if I never heard it again, I think I'd be okay with that. And probably A Crow Left to the Murder.
They're both really. I was so tempted to say A Crow Left because musically, I think it's their best in terms of like Mike Isaager's guitar work is terrific. Yep. But it's and you know what? It's a really. I almost forgot about the existence of Eight. But when you said it, I was like, actually, that's a really good. And I think my biggest thing about that, someone once said, and it really made me laugh, but it stuck with me. He said, it sounds like they recorded the bass drum underwater, was the way that he phrased. And something about that, every time I then heard any song off of it. And I thought a couple of them translated slightly better live, but the mixing, like the production, I know it was Skrillex, wasn't it, who did it like last minute or something, I think the story goes. But the production on it definitely wasn't for me, I have to say.
I could see where a modern audience would be into that, though, because it really fell right into the line of where production was, especially at that time frame. What was that, around 20? Oh, man, I'm going to guess totally wrong here. 2015, 2016, somewhere around that area is when that album released. Awesome. Yeah, because at that point, that's when things were really starting to be popular that had those kinds of production techniques. And it's become more common since then. And a lot of the drums are fake. There's so much like ambience putting in. And I love the idea of sound design, so to speak. But I'm not still sure how much I personally love implementing that into traditional music, like rock music and stuff like that. Because it's always been cool to have effects. Like you think about bands from the 60s and 70s, you had a lot of people who were just being introduced to the wah. And like when Hendrix was, it's just like, whoa, what on earth is happening here? And Van Halen comes around and you're hearing a phaser and you're like, oh my God, like what is this? So there's always been points in time where new pieces of gear is being used to create new sounds. But now I feel like the theatrical event of everything, because the quality of the technology has not only become more accessible to the average band and average musician, but it's gotten so good and so convincing and easy to use that I feel like that's becoming much more prominent in that style of music. And you're into a lot of the same stuff that Dave, the other co-host of the Audiomo Podcast, is into, as far as like those kinds of progressive kind of bands that also have a little bit of that emo vibe to them. And that is, I don't need to tell you, that whole genre, it feels like now it's all scored for a movie.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's it's funny how those trends go. Everyone wants everything kind of epic. And it's really interesting, what you said about production, because I feel the same way, because I've been studying sound design as part of my music degree. And something I sort of have revisited. And what's been really interesting to me in how you implement things is I think people are implementing things because it's easy and because it's easy to use without necessarily asking why. And I think it's kind of, there are some albums that have done it quite well. Like one album that springs to mind, like the Them Crooked Vultures album. I love the fact that they clearly made some decisions like letting some of the amps bleed through the overheads and just not editing that out. So you just get that live room. It's appropriate for what you're doing. I think what's kind of happened, in my opinion, or something that I'm enjoying less, but maybe this is just a sign of me getting older and grumpier, is there seems to be like decisions being made because this is the cool new plugin that's come out, or this is the cool new thing. So everyone, there seems to be these trends, and I don't want to knock anyone, because anyone being creative, it's a great thing, but there seems to almost be these trends where people have gone, oh, this new thing's come out. Like when people first started to discover about like quantizations, everyone would do that the same way. And then everything kind of just gets to that point where it will all then inherently sound similar, even if musically it's not, because it's just produced, you're sort of shrinking the parameters, I guess. And yeah, and it's really fascinating. Like you say, then you get genre trends. So like the kind of emo progressive thing now, it's about being, you know, bigger, more epic. There's a lot more. I've got quite into like some post rock type influences as well, and that's been really creeping into the kind of emo progressive thing where it's, you know, but again, to varying levels of necessity. You know, you don't just have like a 2-minute epic intro because you know it needs to serve a purpose to the song. But I would argue some people are getting that balance better than others. You know?
I don't think you're wrong. And I think that it's a trend that happens regardless of genre, like you said, and regardless of time frames. Things get abused like crazy because it's what's working right now. But I think the pitfall is, I don't think it happens as much now because I don't think the labels have as much say as they used to, as far as, sure, the really big acts, they're going to have more control over that because there's a lot of funding involved. But for the average band, it's all independent, or it's a lot of it's self-done these days. So they don't have these people to answer for, and they don't have budgets to repay back. And one thing that I learned very young on is if you get any sort of record deal or anything like that, that's how it used to be. Nowadays, it is quite different. But you would get what would appear to be a significant amount of money to spend, whether that money is going to go to, okay, we're going to give you $50,000 to go shoot a music video. And you're like, 50 grand for us to go shoot a music video? This is crazy. That's amazing. What are we going to do with this? Okay, now we're going to invest this much, another $20,000 in your promotional stuff. We're going to have you here. We're going to pay this amount of money. And then all of a sudden, what you don't realize has happened in the background is you've amassed a bill. Now, after the album has released, you're thinking, okay, even if the record is starting to do well, so to speak, and this is even at the mid-range, because I'm not talking about big production acts, because big production acts, you can take these numbers and add 2 zeros to everything that I've just said right now, and you'd be much more in the ballpark. I have to pay back $100,000 before I will get a single dime of the music that I've written? Yeah, didn't you read the contract? We paid for this, we paid for that. And then, well, how did this band go broke? They sold 1 million copies. Well, it took them selling 750,000 copies to break even with the record company so that they could start making a dime to begin with. Why are they still on the road? Because it paid better in the long run. It's just the industry. I'm happy that it's changed in the way that it has. Honestly, I think it's all for the better, because you will get less people who deliberately do what they think is going to find them the most monetary gain and the monetary benefit to it. Now, is that going to be representative of all people that do music? No, of course there's going to be people that do it strictly for the money, but there's people that do everything for the money. There's people that do YouTube strictly for the money. There's people that do any given sales job for the money. You have to understand and respect that. But I think when you have art involved, it's best to have this kind of system. The only problem is you're lost in a sea of people. You don't have that access to get kind of pushed to the front like you used to. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really fascinating time, because it kind of feels like the best and worst time to be a musician or to play music. And it's such a conflicting thing, because, you know, one day you kind of log into something and you go, this is brilliant. Like, a friend can recommend me a band when he stood in, you know, Spain at a festival in a field going, oh God, these guys are great. And you instantly check them out and you go, oh, they're fantastic. And that word of mouth is important, but obviously there's hundreds of bands, thousands of bands, and you can then go down a rabbit hole. You can discover new bands, and that's terrific. But if you're one of those bands, it's meant, you know, and the natural thing with everything, you know, and again, an old and grumpy comment is incoming, but, you know, the concentration span starts to diminish, because we have so much information. We're switching between things so quickly. So that, you know, it's almost like the famous saying about, you know, someone can decide if they like a book in the first sentence. We're kind of at that musically now. You know, someone like, and I've been guilty of this. You know, I like to think, oh, I'll commit to an album, I'll listen to an album, I'll give it a real chance. But that's a lie I tell myself, if I'm honest, because if I get halfway through the first song and it's terrible, I'll skip to the second song. And if that's terrible, I might get to the third song, but that depends on my mood. And so the honest truth is, you know, you're in a place where you could argue the quality goes down because of it being saturated, or perhaps more accurately, what you're looking for is just harder to find, just because of sheer amount of information. So then what it comes down to, I think if you're a band or a musician or any type of artist, is having that why, like knowing why you're doing it, like, and that being important to you, because the rest of the stuff can easily get lost, and you can get lost in that stuff as well. Because I think if you're doing it just because, but you're not expecting anything from it, that's also fine. But I think if you're expecting something, but you don't know why you're doing it, you're just kind of ticking along, you're then kind of hoping on luck, really. You know, which again, it's up to how people operate. You know, it's different personalities and different types. But I think now in this kind of day of being able to find everything, it's amazing. But I think you have to have an idea of what it is you're hoping to achieve, or what you want to do or feel or create, and then focus on that, because that's going to bring you the most happiness. And then if you want anything more than that, you've kind of got to do your research and work on that, and, you know, sort of be a better business, you know, guy. And I guess it's the same with YouTube. You know, it's fascinating. Lots of conversations on the live streams we've sort of had, and it's, you know, I kind of was laughing, thinking, I saw a video of Rabia's from many, many moons ago, and I thought, oh, you know, it really makes me chuckle, because he was a good guitarist who then had to learn how to do video editing, who then had to learn to do how to work YouTube, who then had to learn to do what the best thumbnails or captions are, so all of a sudden you've gone from being this guy in your room playing a guitar or whatever, to working for a music shop, to becoming a marketer, to becoming a video editor, and it's kind of a daisy chain of sort of skills needed that, again, have created a terrific career for some people, and that's great. But it also sometimes can take away from the initial thing you were doing if you're not careful. So you have to know what you want, I guess, is kind of my point in that waffle.
You have to know what you want, and you have to enjoy doing it once you've figured it out. Because there are people that have gone the route like Rabia has, that have actually figured it out pretty well, as far as the video editing and the marketing side of it, because that's a very real thing when it comes to doing this. You can choose not to do it, and that's your prerogative if you're somebody who doesn't want to go down that path. But the benefits are very real if you do that. If you look at all the social media crap, I can't do it, man. That's me, and I accept it. I accept that I am limiting myself, because I will not play that game, because I don't find fun in it. I find fun in editing. I find fun in talking to people. I find fun doing live streams and just filming in general. But I don't have fun timing, scheduling posts for Instagram, hitting every hashtag, making sure when I do a video that I have the perfect thumbnail for everyone. Although I've gotten a little bit better at them, because I have this great app that does like 90% of the work for me. But you have to find that balance. Otherwise, you lose the joy of it. But you made a very good observation. And I want to get your opinion on this, because you've released a few records, right? Or you've worked on records that have been released, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were talking, well, there was a lot in there, but one of the things that you were mentioning is the people's attention span. Now, are you currently working on something? Are you still working on the blues/rock project right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is sheerly a personal opinion from your perspective. I'm curious to know this. In the tracking process, once you get past that, when you're thinking of album order itself, like how you would intend for somebody to listen to it start to finish, do you stress about it nearly as much as, say, you would have 10 years ago, knowing that what's likely to happen is you're going to pick your single, and unlike the old days where you would get the single and then you wouldn't have the quick skip button. You would have to do it manually on the Walkman. Yeah, I remember one of those. I had one of those too. Or, sometimes you didn't have access to any of that. You just listen to it all the way through. I feel like people are more open to it. Do you still format what you work on in a time-based order for songs? Or do you just kind of throw it together and it is what it is? Because I know people that do both, and I can see the argument for both.
Yeah, I can definitely see the argument for both. I mean, me personally, but just because of how my personality is, I have an idea of how I want the track order to go. I think that comes from sometimes almost that love of kind of proggy records, where they tend to tell a story anyway. But it's kind of, no matter what project I'm doing or what style it is, I very much kind of think I want there to be an album. I want there to be different messages. I don't just, and sometimes that even sneaks into kind of sort of writing process as well. Like, when I use my DAW quite a lot to actually write as well. So I'll, find in drum loops or stuff if I'm on my own. And sometimes I will still do that thing where I'm like, actually, I might end the song like this because it will lead into another song I'm writing, and that will be a lovely transition. And so it will even influence how I write. And I think, because I still get that joy from listening to an album from front to back, especially when I like and thinking about how it's structured and analysing how it is. Maybe like that almost kind of fancy of why they've made that decision. I wonder what went down in the studio, why they decided to do this. Why has this song randomly got a fade out? How did that come? Or, other ways maybe I would have done it. And that's always been a joy I've got from when I've listened to music as well. Some of my favorite things to do are to question those decisions. And another thing I really love doing is harmonizing the guitar parts as well, like playing a record and then just working out kind of octave harmonies or something really cheesy, but just for fun.
You are, my friend, indeed what I would consider one of the last of the dying breeds. You are a real musician in that sense when it comes to tracking and recording and even the song structure. I don't entirely base endings of songs around things. Well, what I'll do is, first of all, I always write out the key and the progression for every song on paper. So what'll happen so that I avoid those kinds of pitfalls, because a lot of bands don't realize they'll be doing this. They'll stay in the same kind of pocket, even though you're not starting. They'll play in just D major or call it A minor. They're relative. So it'll be 2 or 3 songs in a row where you could interchange all of those chords for that 9 or 10 minutes, however long those 3 songs are added together. And it might as well be one song at that point, because the listener's not getting any sort of information being relayed to them that's saying, okay, this is definitively a new song. Even if you change tempo, that's not going to do it, because the entire musical feel of it is still going to be in there when you're playing, the major, and then you switch. Oh, this song's in a minor key. Yeah, you're playing in a relative minor of D now. You're in A minor. So it's like, it's little things to think about. So it's just, I don't know. I feel like I'm one of those really nerdy people when it comes to that stuff. Yeah, well, B minor for the sake of D. So if you just write a song in D major and then you go to B minor, it's a very popular thing, because you have to think, well, it's one of the most used chord progressions in the world. You have D, A major, B minor, G, and then you just recycle where those notes go in between. Or if you really want to get fancy with it, you do B minor for the sad, G, E major, then the A, then you play that half diminished chord in between the A and the B to go back to the B minor. And it's just like, oh, that's so much tension in that chord. That's amazing. I remember the first time I heard that, it was actually in a punk rock record. And I was just like, oh my God, these guys are real amazing. Those are just power chords. But but I think it is important to structure things in a way where it's like a piece of art, because you wouldn't find all of the colors in one spot. You wouldn't want to overload somebody's sensory brains or something like that in one area. I think the more that you can spread things out, the better. And if you can transition, the convenience I find with effects pedals that I never used to have. What I love about this Strymon stuff, and what I love about this Earthquaker devices, the Astral Destiny, the trails that they leave off. Because I don't use these kinds of effects that much in the songs, but at the end of songs, I almost use them as like a cop-out. Not that's a bad word for it, but I use them as a way to make a transition very interesting or very tense now that I wouldn't have thought of before. And I feel like that's one of my favorite parts of effects pedals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that is the joy. And it's interesting what you were saying about the construction of, the songs and that. And again, like I've fallen into that trap definitely when I was younger, especially of using stuff. And when I listen back, I've done the same thing 3 songs in a row, just in a slightly different, kind of way. And I think what I've learned, I'd like to think I've learned as I've got older, is part of the joy of music is the relationships between everything, whether that's the intervals, the chords. I think, and in trying to communicate with people, especially like I'm sort of currently teaching my stepson guitar, and I'm trying to, rather than, because he's still young, rather than trying to force him into theory in a way that means he's going to oppose it, because he will get there and he'll find the fun in it. I'm just trying to explain to him the relationships the chords have, just the very classic have fun. This one's going further away from home, this one's coming home, this one's creating a little, just because I think understanding those relationships is really important. But it's also funny that you know what you said about effects pedals, because that really made me laugh with the tails, because I can't tell you how many times live the Boss RE20 Space Echo pedal dug me out of jail, and I will openly admit that there were times, like, if I broke a string, slam that right pedal down, allow it to self-oscillate, and just pretend I'm Radiohead for 5 seconds, and the amount of people that thought that was for a really profound reason, where it was I just needed to get a string out and change so I just kind of pretended I was doing some really proggy, I just play like a dissonant chord, hold that down, do something weird, quickly put a new string in, have my drummer laughing at me because he's like, what's the matter with you, and then kind of resume the song. And it's funny when you get those, those comments at shows where, people sort of go, oh, that was really clever. And you're sort of,
laughing to yourself because you don't want to reveal the curtain.
Yeah, because to be honest, I find compliments inherently awkward anyway, so I struggle. I'm just an awkward person with that. But when people say that, it's even harder for me not to laugh, because I just know it's just not true. I know it was literally, so it's kind of really tricky. So you obviously, want to be polite and say thank you. Yeah, and that is the joy, the joy of effects pedals, I think, as well. And again, similar to what we were saying about different guitars, like I've tried to adopt a similar thing with pedals so that I don't just collect them. If I play it and it takes me somewhere else, it makes me do something different. Like if I'm sitting in my comfort zone too much, but I've got a pedal where that will kind of sound muddy, like especially a lot of like delays and verbs and stuff, rather than necessarily change the pedal all the time, I'll sometimes go, actually, I need to write something that goes with the sound that's on the settings that's just been left, just as an exercise to myself to kind of say, okay, write to that sound rather than have the sound to whatever you're writing, because then it just forces me to just do something different. And I'm a person, I think, who sometimes needs that. If I'm honest, I sometimes need, and it's great when it comes from other people, but if I'm on my own for a period of time, particularly during the lockdowns, it's nice to have those little exercises to force me to kind of go, you're not just going to play in your same boxes, in your same comfort bits, the same influence. Try and do something different, because you never know what fun you'll have until you give that a try, I think.
How do you approach effects pedals when you're searching for a new one? Are you the kind of person who has no problem buying something like a Big Sky or something like that, or would you rather like a El Capistan, for example? And for those who are not familiar with those two pedals, they're both Strymon pedals. And the Strymons, the smaller ones, like an El Capistan or a Flint. Flint would be a better application here, because the Flint is a reverb and a tremolo. Very basic as far as you have 3 settings for the reverb, just a wet, dry, and then there's one other, a dwell, I believe is the other parameter. Whereas on the Big Sky version of it, you could dial everything into the nanosecond. You have like 14 different options, all this programmable stuff. Which camp do you tend to want to go into initially? Do you find there's a big learning curve, or have you ever been put off from purchasing a pedal because you feel you might get overwhelmed, or it might become a time sink, whereas you might spend more time playing with just the pedal and not making any music, just figuring out how it works or just experimenting?
I have 100% fallen into that trap. I did it with the Timeline I had, which was a terrific pedal. And the DD500 I had as well from Boss, and they were both fantastic pedals. And this is entirely a user error or use case. What I've found as I've got older, is I will now want something simpler. I will now want a few parameters that I can learn to control, understand exactly what they do, and that get me a sound that's ultimately either in my head or that I've dialed in that just sounds really cool. The other pedals are absolutely fantastic. Like it's amazing the stuff that you can dial in, and theoretically, you can buy certain pedals. But I think I like to now know, like, simplicity. Like the more stuff there is for me to get wrong. So I'm now in that camp where I'm like, okay, 3 or 4. And that's why I went back to the RE20. because I was like, it's 2 pedals. I kind of almost set and forget it. There's 2 sounds particularly that I use on it a lot that I really like. I'm happy with that. That suits me, the sounds that I want, down to the ground. And there are exceptions. I found the Volante was actually a really good exception, because that had, I find that very usable. I find that it's like, okay, the tape aging especially, that's something that I would want. So I'm like, okay, that's because I understand what that is. But I think the danger is, especially with every pedal sounding incredible on YouTube demos and people who really know what they're doing showing you, you can easily fall into that trap of going, oh my God, that sound is utterly incredible. It's going to be so terrific and make my new record like the best thing I've ever done. But also the sentence I have to say to myself as well is, sometimes you're just in love with the person's playing. It's not necessarily the pedal. There's a couple of guys who demo stuff where I'm just like, I think it's the Pedal Zone, and he demos a lot of ambient pedals. And I had a really good conversation with him where I just kind of like, it's for me, if I didn't pay attention, I'd want to buy every pedal he demos. But it's because I love how he plays. That's what it actually is. And I think that's important sometimes to ask yourself, again, when you've got all this information coming at you and you're accessing gear and it's fun to watch gear, I think you have to kind of go, what do I really like here? Like, is this that I just love the way that the person who's demoing it plays? Or and again, if there's a £500 pedal but I'm only going to use one sound on it, can I get that one sound from a £200 pedal? Because then I've got a better choice to make, but maybe that's just because I don't have the luxury of a lot of funds to just go and blow. But it's definitely a consideration I want to make as I get older.
I had this discussion internally last night about a pedal I have. Now, I have a very minimal amount of effects and modulation pedals. I have the 2 Strymons. I have the Zelza, which will never come off my board. And I have the Volante, which will also never come off my board. I'm happy that you have good things to say about that. The third one is the Earthquaker Devices Astro Destiny. And I love it, but I only use it for the shimmer reverb. And I started to think to myself, I'm like, well, there's no way for me to change presets on this live unless I bend down and manually turn a rotary knob. And if you perform, you don't want to be doing that. You just simply don't. If it had like MIDI or something else, maybe I'd be okay with dialing in more stuff. But I'm like, maybe I could sell this and then get something that could do just this for less money. But one thing that I find interesting, and I agree with you 100%, by the way, on the guitar demos on YouTube. I think a lot of people will either identify with the person and be like, oh, I really like this guy, or they'll really identify with the playing. And so the kind of gear itself is just like, somehow that's what comes across with the memory of the video. It's just like, oh, well, I just watched Chris Buck play a new Yamaha guitar, and it sounded so good. He played with such inspiration, but I need the guitar. Let's ignore the fact that he uses this amazing hybrid switching between finger picking and actual analog picking, and the volume knob control, plays with supreme harmonic content. He's such a good player, but somehow he doesn't always do demos. When he does, at the end of the video, you're thinking, I need that product. It's the same thing with Greg Koch when he does it for Wildwood guitars. These guys, they could play anything. It doesn't really matter. And one fortunate thing that has worked out for me, a lot of the players that I like the most don't use these high-end, super fancy pedals like the $600-700 Chase Bliss stuff. I listen to Corey Wong. I listen to Phil X. I listen to Greg Koch, like I said, and Chris Buck. Those are the main people I listen to on YouTube. Corey Wong doesn't necessarily demo gear, but when he's playing and he's going over stuff, it's literally clean funk. It's like it's all chops. There's nothing to hide behind. So I can listen to that and be like, oh, I like that. And then when I pick up my guitar, I don't need another piece of gear to be like, I can work on this right now. I have what I need to do it. This is great. And he records a lot of his stuff DI'd straight into the console, and then it's done in post. So for me, it's just like, I'm fortunate that I haven't fallen into that trap. I guess it's just luck of the genre and what I like. And then Greg Koch, the ultimate just classic guitar player, just give him an old amp that has a clean channel, give him a boost for some drive, a little bit of reverb and like a vibrato / a univibe, something like that. And that guy's set. He can do anything in the whole world. Doesn't need to touch any of these stuff. And that's just the kind of music that I more lean towards and identify with. So I'm actually very fortunate because I do go through a lot of guitars. A lot of the time it's to buy them and sell them. But with pedals, if I find something I like, I'm like, all right, that's on the board. It's like the Jazzmaster I've had for 20 years. I've never felt the need to get rid of it. It just works.
Totally, yeah, and I think that's such an important thing. I think as well, sometimes it's really important to look at what you have as well, and kind of go. I think it's so easy to, and like I say this as someone who has fallen into that trap, if I'm honest, in the past, for sure. Like where you kind of go, I need this thing because it's inspiring, and I think it's linked a lot. It was really interesting what you watching the podcast with Rafa, and you guys touched on ADHD. And it got me thinking because I have it as well, and I was kind of thinking a lot of musicians typically do, and I think that sometimes what then happens is you get that fixation. You're like, oh, this thing is, and it's not all linked to that, but it was just something that really made me kind of think. You kind of go, oh, this new product is absolute, this is the thing, this is the one. It's kind of like those people that are hopeless romantics almost, and it's like, oh, this next person is the one. But sometimes you kind of just need to look at the gear you have and say, I could just EQ this. Like, the amount of times you hear people say, and we all say, these things as well, like whether it's a guitar or a pedal, or, oh, this sounds, insert adjective here, muddy's a classic one. And you kind of go, have you thought about just turning the bass down on your amp because it's set right up? Like sometimes you can kind of see things and you're like, you can EQ that out in 15 seconds. You don't need to buy a different pedal or guitar for that to happen. You just need to. But I think, again, we watch so much content, it's almost autonomous. People are just like, oh, that's muddy. No, I'll just get the next guitar because this is the best one. And I think,
better one.
And maybe that's lies we just tell, maybe I'm talking out of turn. It's something we just tell ourselves as an excuse to buy gear. And if you've got the money, who am I to tell you it's not to? But at the same point, I just kind of think it's really great when you have a rig where you go, I know what this does. Like I said, I went back, the Boss pedal, I've used an example a couple of times because I know exactly what it does. It sounds beautiful to me. A lot of people have complimented it at gigs. It seems to be the sound that people like. So, it gets good feedback. So I'm just kind of like, so why then? And again, that's a really good example. They've just relaunched it with, I think, because of the Volante, they've got like the tape aging stuff. Yeah. And I looked at it and I was kind of like, oh, maybe I'll buy that. And I literally had to stop myself. And I was kind of like, you've got 3/4 of it. Why would you trade that in or sell that and spend double the money on getting that again, plus another feature? Like your audience probably isn't going to notice anyway. Like, so it's a question, again, if I had the money, maybe I would have done, or if I was willing to spend the money. But I think it's just so important to look at your rig and go, if I dial this in like this, and that's where it all doubles back to what you're trying to achieve. If you know what you're trying to achieve, whether that's in your practice routine, whether that's in the gear that you use, I think then you come back to that place where you can then focus yourself more and don't get so distracted with those things because you're like, well, I'm trying to achieve this. So what I'll do is I'll learn how to dial my rig in to as close as I can get for that on any budget, and I'll practice things that lend itself to that thing because that's what I love doing or what I want to achieve or what I aspire to be, whatever the reason is. And I think once you get to that place, you find yourself quite a lot happier and quite a lot more productive because you end up, I think, because otherwise, I know I've had it. One day I could want to do, post rock. The next day I can want to go back to kind of emo stuff that my old bands used to do. Then I want to do blues rock. It's kind of, I could want to do everything, but if I tried to mix all that, it is what it is. But it's just, I think just knowing and having individual, even if they're separate individual projects, it just helps clear the mind. And that's really important for me.
I'm smiling because the timing of this couldn't be better. Last night, after the little one went to bed and my father-in-law who's staying with us, he went to bed too. We don't have like the biggest house. We have a decent sized house, but at night when everyone's asleep, we kind of go into the garage, me and my wife, when we're talking. And we were talking about music. I forget how we got on this subject. And she just says to me, she goes, I've been listening to a lot of emo lately. Now she's like 4 years younger than me. And it led to an interesting conversation, but she's just like, I miss it. And I'm listening to the lyrics now to it and thinking like, this is so bad, but I still love it so much. It's just, I connect with it. It brings back so many memories. And she's just really falling in love with the genre again. So I think it's very appropriate that I'm talking to you. And I mention this because I want to ask you, because I asked her this same exact question last night. Okay. What is your favorite emo record of all time?
Oh, wow. Okay.
You only get one. You're on an island. That's it. You get one. What is it? I
Oh
love
my
putting
God.
people on the spot.
Yeah, that is. I cannot tell you how hard that question. There's literally just like a roller deck of records just cycling through my head now. Of there is different. I mean, the one I listened to the most, I think, particularly when I was in my early 20s, was probably, despite it being quite commercial, was probably In Love and Death by The Used. But if I'm really honest, it depends if you count. If you count Hours by Funeral for a Friend as an emo record,
Yes,
which
definitely.
I would say it is, then 100% that, because that when I heard those guys, and it was really funny. The band I was in then sort of was like, oh, it started to creep in, and then we thought we were like the first ones who cottoned into it, this really like arrogance of youth thing. And then we did a gig a little bit further afield in London. I live about half an hour from London, but we actually did a gig in London, and everybody clearly heard that record, and the first record, to be fair as well, Casually Dressed, but it clearly crept in. So then all of a sudden we were very much in the days before Spotify, lost in the saturation of that market, and kind of drove home from that gig going, maybe we need to find our own thing. But yeah, that record is unbelievable. And to be honest, I got the box set of their first 3 records on vinyl about 3 months ago. It's still just such a good record to me. What did your wife say?
Taking Back Sunday, but that's a whole different conversation, because she but the thing is, she qualified it. She's just like, I know it's bad. I know it's bad, but the Taking Back Sunday album with Blue and all the fun stuff and cut from the team, and I was just like, okay. I'm like, I get it.
It was a fun record. It was good.
It was a fun record, and I was like, you don't need to feel guilty about it. That's what you like. And when you mentioned The Used, I laughed to myself too. We actually play Buried Myself Alive acoustically, which is me and her, which is hilarious because we have it mixed in with a bunch of like these old classic songs. I think the way the set list is now, it leads from the Beach Boys into Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons into The Used, into Buried Myself Alive, which is hilarious. And like, what's funny is in Florida, there's a lot of old people, but there's also like, it's not all old people where I live. There are some young people. So what'll happen is whenever we do this, whoever's working the bar, their head shoots up. They're like, what the hell? Like, are they really playing that song right now? And like, they'll really get into it, even though, obviously there's no distorted guitar or anything like that, but it's an unmistakable song. You know what I mean? So yeah. I have so much fun confusing and surprising the audience. I think that was a good record. I like that record a lot too. But going back to Funeral for a Friend, I actually, when Dave and I first started doing the podcast together, we would give each other albums to listen to. I gave him Hours. I did not think he was going to like it. He didn't like it very much. He felt like it sounded like a metal band or metal guitarist trapped in a band that they weren't supposed to be in. And I mean, part of me gets that, but that album, man, I saw them play live at an outdoor festival, the Warped Tour, when the Warped Tour was, still all people with instruments playing. And that sounds really conceited, I guess. I don't mean it for it to sound like that, but it really was. It was at that time where you actually had to be in a band and or a really good skateboarder, because they would set up a half pipe for people to skateboard and stuff like that. But Funeral for a Friend, I met them before because I was a big fan of Casually Dressed. And I was like, oh, we can meet them, like meet and greet. The line was like one person long. And these guys are just pounding beers. I go up. I gotta find this picture. I gotta send it to you. And there's a Say Cheese, so I'm just with the band, and the lead singer randomly just decides to bite my ear. So I have this picture for the rest of my life with the lead singer of Funeral for a Friend trying to almost take a bite out of my ear. I was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, that's like, first of all, why are you biting me? I don't know you. Second of all, like, you're actually biting me. Like, what are you doing? But I'll never forget, I had so much fun watching them, but they were terrible. Like, as far as the performance go, you could tell they drank all day. And I guess that when you're playing the Warped Tour, how many dates you think that is all in a row with that amount of traveling with so many other bands? You're not the focal point of that. So it was just like, oh man, like whatever. So I bought Hours is the moral of the story. I had never heard it before. I get home and I listen to it and I was like, this is a masterpiece. it was not what I wanted it to be though, if that makes any sense.
Yep,
because there
definitely.
were certain songs on Casually Dressed that I was really leaning into like how heavy it was, or also how poppy it was. Like Juno, I consider a very poppy song, but that's one of my favorite songs that they've ever written. So when I get Hours, and it's a lot darker in many ways, and that almost has that theatrical feel that we were starting to hit on earlier in this podcast to it. I think the song Sunny and the song Alvarez are just works of art for that band. There's a lot of other good songs on that album, but those two are so unique to that album. I don't know. What's your favorite song on that record?
Oh man, Joe, it's really hard because it's really interesting what you said about them not being, particularly when they first hit America. I think their performance, obviously not for me to speak on their part, but I think they did the drink. I remember seeing footage and kind of going, this isn't the band that I saw. I remember seeing them in Wales, and it was an unbelievable show. And I think the singer occasionally, bless him, kind of struggled a little bit towards the end of the tour, but. I saw them there's a festival over here called Slam Dunk. That's a one-day festival. And I saw them last year. They did their reunion shows. And a song that I liked, but was never my favorite song on that record, crept up. And live, History was unbelievable in that moment at this age.
The crowd. Yeah.
Because of the atmosphere. So all of a sudden, it's changed that section of the record for me, which is kind of strange so many years later. And I guess one of the beautiful things about live music is it can totally reinvigorate. And I had the same this year. I saw Alexis on Fire at the same festival this year. And it's been a long time since I listened to them. And I came out being like, that was unbelievable. I can't believe I've waited so long. Like, it's been so long since I've seen them. So that sort of grabbed a special moment. I mean, my initial one on that album was Roses from the Dead, because it was the first time, and I know that a lot of people watching this are going to think it's sacrilege, especially considering, Van Halen exists. But it was the first time that I personally ever wanted to try tapping. When I heard that song, I'd had no interest personally in wanting to do that. Like, I loved listening to people do it, but for some reason, that song. And again, coming as an adult years later, I think the bit that actually grabs me about that song is the way the drums come in. If I'm honest, I don't even think it is the guitar. But I think that moment when I was, quite a younger player, when that came in, it kind of made me go, I want to do this. I want to learn how to tap because this sounds so cool. And, so that was kind of a special one. But Sunny as well. I'm totally with you on that.
That's a great song. It's funny you mentioned tapping. One of the first times that, because I don't associate bands like that with tapping in that genre for the most part. And, I was more of when I first heard Van Halen, I was like, can I do this? Like, is this something I can reasonably figure out? I learned quickly, no, you sir, are a rhythm guitarist. But I was listening to Streetcar, which is another album on Hours. And that little riff they do in the refrain, that's tapped. That do 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 do, and then that next part that comes after it, that's the most basic tapping in the whole world, but it's still tapped. So that kind of opened my eyes to like, you don't have to be doing crazy double tapping. You don't have to do anything like. You can tastefully add that stuff in, and I think that's important to hear as a guitar player. And I've also found that with sweep picking, which is something that I've been trying to find a format for this video for so long, of implementing sweep picking without it being just typical metal stuff. Because I don't play that kind of music. So for me to just be like, here's this. First of all, it's going to not be as good as people that actually play that kind of stuff. But more shows showing how the musical side of it works and how it can make you understand intervals better, understand relative minor to major, and understand just changes and how to play these things over each other and create a unique sound. I think there's so much to be learned from every sort of technique, from every sort of genre, that I think it's foolish for guitar players to write something off like, that could never work in my style of music. That just won't work. I'll save it. If I ever want to play that, I'll play that. Mixing things in is how we get some of the greatest and most inspirational guitar players in the world. But I got one more thing I want to talk to you about, Ian. You mentioned Sunny. I want to talk about a different Sunny. I think I'm going. So I kept this to the end because I know most people who click on this, first of all, they're going to be like, how the hell they won't know you as far as like your preferences of music, but they're going to be hearing me talking about some of these emo records and naming off songs and albums and be like, there's no way he like what? Like this guy plays like clean music all the time. Like he never scratches any of the surface, any of that. So I think that'll be just like, okay, that's kind of strange, but I love football and I know you love football too. Did you see what Heung-min Son's dad just said?
I did, yeah. Yeah.
Do you? So before, I want to preface it with this to anybody who might not know, who does follow football. If you don't follow football, odds are you've clicked out of this. But we're going to keep this quick. His dad basically said he plays for Tottenham Hotspur right now. They're qualified for the Champions League, but they have no chance of competing for the title. Let's be serious here in the Premier League. His dad has come out after he won the Golden Boot, which means he scored the most goals, and he didn't do it without a penalty, which is a lot more impressive than somebody who plays in Liverpool and with a lot inferior talent, to be fair, than what Mo Salah plays with. His dad came out and said in order for him to make the most and prove himself as a top-class player, he needs to go to a different club. How do you feel about that, and would you be okay with that? And where, if you could pick one top club for him to go to, you can handpick it, where do you send him?
It's interesting because obviously as a fan of the club and a season ticket holder, it's not something you ever want to hear. But I think you have to be honest. You have to be honest with yourself. And like, he's a credit to the club and he's a credit to the sport. And the one thing I would say to people, even if you're not interested in the sport, at the end of the season they do like a lap of honour. And I'm a season ticket holder, so you get to see kind of all this, and they won't show in the cameras. I think it's always a really good mark of a man when every single other player's kids run up to him saying like Uncle Sonny, and kind of he's just one of those humans in life that is just so positive and such a credit to what he does. Obviously I want him to stay forever. He signed a new contract last year, obviously I would, but it's one of those where our league is now incredibly difficult to win because of the money that's come in. The points totals and the gulf between the top two sides and third downwards is staggering. And it's always a criticism that English fans have levelled at other leagues unfairly and without looking now that we are in a very, very glass house throwing that particular stone. Sonny deserves to win everything. Obviously he does. He's a terrific player. And if you're going to win everything, it's really fascinating. The team that would look after him best, if he wanted to just genuinely go win a league and then do really well in the Champions League and potentially win it, although I'm not sure they've got the right manager at the moment, but that's a whole different story. He could go to somewhere like Bayern Munich. They'd look after him. They'd hero worship him. He'd win the league at a canter, and occasionally they win the Champions League. And I think those sort of wing forwards fit in really nicely there, and he's levels above Gnabry and other players that they currently have. But I don't think Nagelsmann's the right manager for him. I have a bias, so I would like to prefix this by saying if I didn't have that bias, I would have said he would have been very good at Liverpool, but I can't bring myself to say that without being physically sick.
No English club. No English club. You're not staying on an English club.
So it's, so that's tricky. I think, the other one really, the kind of obvious one, I guess, is Madrid. In terms of, he'd go and win stuff there. I think he'd be a really good foil for that. The only thing I would say is currently Vinicius Jr. has been playing there, and then that creates a problem for him because Vinicius Jr. is a wonderful talent as well. So, and obviously I have a slight history with Madrid in terms of obviously the Gareth Bale thing. He did so well out there, and they hated him, and then he didn't cover himself in glory. So the thought of that happening to Sonny makes me find it really hard to say that. It's kind of.
I understand. I will say this though. I think. Out of all the clubs, I think that's the best. I think if he were to go, I don't think he's going to, because first of all, Levy's he's a very shrewd businessman. I don't need to convince you of that. I think Bayern would be a good shout because you have to think, for how many years did you have Ribery, then you had Mario Gomez in the middle, and then you had Robin on the other side. There's all about wing play, a very strong, compact defense that was midfield that was defensive orientated. And then just monsters in the back, and always a very reliable goalkeeper. I think that he fits them really well. But they're in for Mane right now, and I don't know. You get Mane, how much money you're going to have left over, because they're not like a club like Manchester City or Liverpool or some of these other clubs. They don't spend like that. They spend, and it looks like they spend a lot, but they do good business. They don't spend nearly as much. You look at what Darwin Nunez just cost Liverpool. The record transfer fee. He can't speak a lick of English, which is fine, but he's never proven outside of Liga Portugal that he could score a goal. Yep. So
he's also had the thing that surprised me that I didn't realise, because I've obviously seen his performances this season. They've looked good in Portugal, but I didn't realise he's had 3 pretty serious knee injuries before 22 as well, which, I mean, obviously every transfer carries a risk, and I think that's just one of those things. And to be honest, I'm also in a really strange position talking to you right now, because for once Spurs are actually moving. Conte's forcing the hand, so we're actually making signings before pre-season. And like I say, obviously anyone who doesn't watch football would be bored by now, but all I can say is this: it's as close as I've got in the sport to fainting. Like, when they've been announcing that we're actually doing something, like my team typically shops in the bargain basement in the week before the transfer window closes, and we'll be linked with 4 players you've heard of, and we'll get basically a cheap equivalent from somewhere like France that you've never heard of but is apparently the same. So for us not to be doing that is fantastic. So it's a funny time for me to be answering this question, having this debate, because I feel like we're building something, but obviously with the realistic hat on, you're going to have to build something absolutely monumental to bridge the gap between Manchester City, who have already improved this summer as well, and Liverpool, who have also already technically improved. Obviously, when they sell Mane, you can argue whether they really have, because Nunez isn't proven. But it's so to bridge that gap is going to be huge. But it's looking at that fit for the player as well, because I think, there's certain teams, and the one thing I would say for Madrid, as terrific as they are, is they have a habit of mistreating certain players when they're not the flavour of the month, and that's something I struggle with all the Spanish clubs. It seems to be a very strange culture out there. We've got some people we work with who are from, I know this will be sacrilege to you, from Barcelona, and so we talk about football a lot, and they have some strange, not them personally, but they relay to me some strange opinions and ways that their fans treat certain players, and I find it fascinating.
Barcelona that's a can of worms. Because people, and the thing about like Gareth Bale, and I know we're really going off base here, but the thing about Gareth Bale here is he didn't help himself. And now, do I think that he deserves to be ostracized the way that he has been? No, I don't think that was the case. But he did not help himself. So that situation is a bit unique, but you have to give him a proper send off. He won you a Champions League, at least one by himself. Really, he did. Yeah. And the way that just ended, it was all a mess. He gave up. You could tell when someone's training and not training. And you could tell by how they react on the bench, because you even look at Hazard. Hazard and Bale, neither of them playing, both on big wages. Hazard's still happy with the team after every match. He's always up there. Bale's he's there. And maybe you can say it's just the amount of years that this has been happening to Bale. It's just he's tired of it. So it's hard to say. We don't know the inside of it. But I mean, when I think of a player being poorly treated, there's nobody in Madrid I'll never forget this. Iker Casillas, the backbone of that club for decades. Embodiment came up through La Castilla and all of this, and just throw it out the door, because Jose Mourinho's just like, nope, too much drama. I'm not dealing with this. You're leaking stuff to your girlfriend who works in the media. And so, you killed a club legend. Great job, Mourinho. Add it to the list of things you killed in your career. But no, I think Son, Vinicius Jr., and Benzema front three. But you play Son on the right because he's 2-footed. He's not 1-footed. He's 2-footed. Play him on the right. Let Vinny run up, and then Benzema and Son can kind of intertwine. One of them plays the false nine. Oh, forget it. Yeah. I don't think it happens, but I would love to see it, just because there's just so much quality, and just to see him play with 2 forwards of that much quality. Because when he plays with Kane, it's great, but it's not. Yeah, it's just Kane. What Lucas Moura? I mean, the one that's actually come in and done incredibly since January, to his credit, like Kulusevski has surprised me, because my girlfriend follows Juventus quite closely, and she said to me, like, oh, I'm quite surprised, because he started promising, and then something seemed to happen where they didn't play him as much, and then obviously he came in, and I knew he was a talent, but I didn't realize. I don't think anyone expects him to hit the ground running, and to be honest, he's one of the reasons we're in the Champions League, and that's and it was terrific. So it's like, that's really good, and it's really, and I think our front three is terrific, and on its day can cause anyone problems. Our issue is
particularly in that central midfield against mid and low blocks. And obviously you've got to do something really good to break that down. It's going to be fascinating to see, and it's part of the ongoing thing, I think, especially when you're a Spurs fan. You can never be what's called optimistic, because that's just not, that's impossible. It's not in our culture. Like, you know, even making signings now, I'm like, we'll find a way to mess this up, I've got no doubt, you know. But it's kind of, but you can be, so I'm sort of more excited for this oncoming season in terms of having something close to a bit more steel, a bit more mentality. But on Sunday, I'm just really grateful that I've got to watch him. Like Modric was the same. At the point in time he was at the club, you kind of, sometimes you have to look as a fan and go, I'm just glad I got to watch him play. And Sonny's also had the benefit of creating a lot of history for us. So when our new stadium was built, he scored the first goal in it, the first Champions League goal in it. Like, he's had so much kind of good and so many contributions. So I think sometimes, again, it's a bit sort of doubling back to like the gear and stuff. Sometimes you just have to look at what you've got and kind of go, I know it could be better, but you know what? I'm so happy that I've just got to see this, you know. It's kind of, Yeah,
and Luka Modric is the vintage Telecaster custom. That's all you need. Just give me that. I don't need the bells and whistles. I don't need a Bigsby. I don't need any sort of. Just give me that one original guitar. It's the best in the world. It is so good. I would take him over Xavi, Iniesta. Forget it. But we've rambled on enough about football. I'd like to thank you, Ian. And this has been a lot of fun for me. And I could really talk more about just this, because this is exciting to me. There's not many people that I could talk to that with this sport to this, you know, level of specificity about. Because if I say Kulusevski to one of my friends, they'd be like, what are you talking about? And they watch the sport. But I mean, I watch a lot of the Italian league, so I'm familiar with the suite. So I don't know. I'm big on it. I'm obsessed with it. Outside of gear, it's the one thing that I do put a lot of my heart and soul into. And I love players that do it the right way, just like I love guitar players and musicians that do it the right way. So I appreciate heart. I appreciate decent people, and you're a decent person. And I knew that before we got into this, but I'm really happy that we had the time to sit down and do it. So I just wanted to thank you before we wrap this up.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on board. And like I said, I've been loving this series, like listening to Rafa and Evans once, where it made me kind of even more excited to arrange the chat, because it was, and I hope that I sort of haven't done a disservice, because they offered so much. I must admit, it kind of made me chuckle. And the one thing I would say, when you said, I think it was in Evans one towards the end, where you mentioned me and you said, but I'm going to hit you with a curveball because you'll be preparing. I literally, at the time you said that on the video, was writing down the questions you asked Evan to try and prepare. So I felt so like, I was like, we definitely talk a lot because he knows me already. So it's kind of, you definitely got me there.
I knew that if I had asked you any of those same questions, you would have been prepared. So I went out of my way to not do that. I thought the Incubus one was a really good one because your eyes went to it like, oh no, I have to actually think of this on the spot. That's the fun of this, though. That's the fun of this. So I will have you back for sure. If you would like to do this and we could find the time to do it, we can do this once a month. If you're
absolutely,
up to that.
I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to. Yep. I'd absolutely love to.
Or even we will become we will take over Talk Sport. Simon Jordan will be out of a job entirely. He never needs to be listened to again. I love it. I love him, by the way. But we will take over.
Awesome.
We'll take over. We didn't used to own football clubs, but we love the sport. Maybe people would like our perspective on that. That'll be how we get rich. That'll be how we get rich. We'll spend all this time with his music and his passion, and it'll just be some idiot sitting in Florida and some other idiot sitting in the UK talking about football. That'll be the thing that puts us over the top in life. I don't know. Who knows? Life's crazy. But
it could be. It would have to be edited, though. I think our football opinions, if we just let ourselves go for an hour.
No, it would not be edited. That's the only reason it works. That's the only thing. And one last thing that has nothing to do with football. But the only reason I think that my channel works in any capacity is because I don't edit out my opinion. Like sometimes I'll say things and I'll watch it after and I'm like, oh, that's bad. I'm like, that was a little too harsh or something like that. And I'm like, no, I don't care. Like, that's how I really feel. I'm just going to leave it in. It is what it is. If people hate me for it, they hate me for it. But I don't know. There's no way to live. You should wear everything on your sleeve, and we're not always right. So, it is what it is. What are you going to do?
I'm often wrong, but thank you so much for having me on board as well. It's been so much fun, and obviously it's great to talk to you on in the comments and stuff, and been even better to do this. So thanks. I really appreciate it.
And we will look forward to doing this again. So we have one more. I just wanted to tell everybody else. The next person lined up is Robbo. Robbo just had cataract surgery. He did okay though. He's doing all right. So this time around next week, yeah, it should be either Monday or Tuesday, I believe. I'll be shooting it with him, and you'll be seeing this on the same day. We're going to be releasing this on Sunday, I believe. So we'll see how things go. But again, thank you, Ian, and thank you to everybody who tuned into this. And if you made it through that football talk and you're not a football fan, you are a huge supporter of this channel, and I really do appreciate that. But I can't help it. I do things for myself sometimes, and I love football. But that's all we got for you guys. Thank you. Like, comment. Let us know what you think down below, and let me know where Son should go play, or should he live out his entire career without winning a trophy at Spurs. Let me know in the comments. Take care, everybody.